We live in a small town on the outskirts of a large city. It's a small street and a few small forests nearby. Me and my best friend, who at the time were maybe 7, were over at our other good friend's house. We opened the back fence door and his dog ran off. This was odd because she was very well trained. She never disobeyed him. So we waited outside in the driveway. We were facing toward the creek in his backyard, and behind the creek was another street, then a small forest. We turned the corner around his little shed to look over. Since we enjoyed the view, we see something massive walking between the two trees. It seemed to hide behind one after we saw it. Both me and my friend almost peed ourselves. This thing was massive, 7 or 8 feet and covered in hair, and it had a weird disfigured face. Now, you might be thinking this is just a child's imagination, but my friend saw it too, so I can't really write it off as just that. I didn't really have a wild imagination either. Even when I did, I could always tell the difference between that inside my head and what the real world was, and I never really exaggerated either. Plus, my friend saw it too, so I know it's true. Still to this day, we talk about what we saw in the woods that day. We don't really know what it was or what it could be, but it definitely is one of the creepiest things I have ever experienced. My friend and I live in the southeastern area of Wisconsin. We love to go Bigfoot hunting. My friend lives in a subdivision near some woods, and we go to an empty lot and throw rocks and bash logs on the side of trees. We never really had an encounter until we decided to stay late and possibly stay the night. It was about 10:30, and I was about 5 feet away from the edge of the forest, just throwing rocks. But I stopped as I heard something moving very slowly through the woods. The rustling stopped, and a rock the size of a softball came flying towards me. It landed about 1 or 2 feet away from me. I took this as a warning and yelled to my friend that we needed to go. We began sprinting towards our bikes when we heard it running through the brush. It sounded like a bear or something shaking the trees. As we rode our bikes away, my friend asked, "What the heck was that?" I was too scared to speak. My friend and I never slept that night. The next day, we did some research, and nearby there have been quite a few Bigfoot sightings. We know it wasn't a bear, because bears don't live this far south in Wisconsin. Some of you may not believe this, but just know, I swear to God, I'm not lying. Being a forest ranger, I have seen a lot of creepy and unexplainable things in the woods. To save your time, I will spare you all the little encounters and just share the one encounter that sticks with me day to day. I was walking deep within the woods. I was trying to map my way out and do an excursion kind of on my off time. I didn't get very much time off from the park, so any time that I could just get off into the woods by myself and camp was definitely time that I utilized. I was walking through the woods, trying to find my way to where I wanted to go. I would usually go off trail, and I was struck by this weird feeling. I kind of felt like I was being watched. But I kind of shrugged it off as me just, maybe being paranoid or something. I found a nice little clearing about 500 feet up, and I decided this is where I will do camp for the day. I started setting up my tent and got a fire going. Soon it began to begin dark. As I was sitting around the fire, cooking some hot dogs that I had brought along the way, I noticed that feeling of being watched came again. But here's the creepy part. Most people would say that they see these creepy eyes or these crazy colors in the sky or whatnot. I didn't see anything like that. But what I saw was something much more terrifying. What looked like to be a man hanging from a noose. was just on the outside of the light of my camp. All I could see was the silhouette of 2 feet dangling, about 6 feet up in the air. What was really odd is that none of these trees had branches. These were all pine trees. So, I freaked the hell out. I saw my flashlight there, but there was nothing there. Maybe I was just worrying and I was overtired or something. So, I go back in my tent and try to sleep it off. I have nothing but nightmares and awful dreams all night and wake up at probably about 6 in the morning. The sun is starting to come up, so I pack my stuff quickly and get the hell out of there. And of all my years being in the woods and being a survivalist and things of that nature, I still have no idea what that was. When I was young, I was one of those kids who was all about being outdoors. I was in the Boy Scouts as soon as I was old enough to join and stayed in until I was 18. In Boy Scouts, there is a group called the Order of the Arrow, or OA. To my young mind, it was like the Special Forces of Scouting, and I was so excited when I was told I had been selected to join their prestigious ranks. So, I packed my bags and went to Camp Dad Dale, Wrestler, New Mexico, and I was ready to see what I would have to do to become an OA. To join OA, you have to go through a trial weekend. I would say not much more of that because the trials that we had to go through are secret. The last night, though, we were split up into groups of 4, given map coordinates, a compass, and a bare bone minimum of what we would need and told to survive for the night, and then to report to a second set of coordinates in the morning. Myself and a 3 scouts started on our way, and we were hiking for about 5 hours before we found a small clearing and confirmed it was our camping spot. From the northeast to the east there was a thick thorny bramble. We tried to find a way to explore it, but the waist-high vines were impossible to get through without something to cut them. So we ignored it and went on just exploring a bit around the camp and goofing off. As night came, we all started to set down and to make a fire. This would be our only source of light for the night. We stayed up for a bit after dark, chatting and telling stupid jokes, and just having fun, talking before we went to bed. We had one small tent, and so myself and one of the other scouts slept outside near the fire, while the other 2 slept inside. I don't remember the time, because none of us had packed a watch, but it was well after the fire had gone out. I was shaken awake by one of the other scouts. He whispered in a quiet voice that would sometimes crack with fear. There's someone outside our campsite? He then pointed up. Moving from north to east outside the clearing was a bright blue ball of light. The odd thing was, the core was bright, but did not seem to cast a light on the trees. It was more like glowing than producing light per se. I stared at it, nervously and curious, as he quietly belly crawled and woke the other 2 up. "It is just some other group messing around," one of the other scouts said as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, not trying to be quiet like the first one or I had. The light didn't seem to do anything different from its motions as the 4th scout said. But wait, that is where the bramble is. It was then that we realized how smooth the light was moving, and how dead quiet the forest around us was. Nothing was making a noise, and not even the moving light. I watched it for some time before accidentally falling asleep again. When I woke up, everyone else was already packing to make it to the rendezvous point. They said that whatever it was last night made them feel scared, and I was the only one to sleep after seeing it. The rest had remade the fire before it faded away, and they stayed up on watch. Sadly, this is where the excitement of the story ends. We packed up and made it to the point without incidents. Before I start the story, let me give you a little insight on myself. I grew up in a very military strict family. From the moment I turned 5, my dad taught me everything I know now, from fighting to survival skills. My dad being an ex-Navy SEAL, nothing really scares me. I'm not trying to paint myself as the most fearless person in the world, but I am also a paranormal investigator. Not something I talk about at work, but after having my fair share of experiences, I grew to love it, and it always interested me. So, from putting away some of the worst people in the world and my fair share of seeing the creepiest shit, nothing honestly scares me. This story takes place several summers ago. Two of my friends, Craig and Justin also being in law enforcement, and the other a firefighter, decided to go camping. I always felt so comfortable in the woods. As I said, my dad taught me everything I know. We would spend days in the woods just living off the land. My friend knew of a very remote area up in New Hampshire. I don't recall the location. I was actually really excited because I hadn't been camping in years. It took us some time to find a good spot to get a good idea of the area. I felt like we were in no other planet entirely. We set up our tents, gathered up some firewood, and all of us had brought MREs to eat. We sat around talking for what felt like hours. We all grew pretty tired and decided to head to bed. I settled into my tent and quickly passed out. I was awoken by probably 3 a.m. to this horrible feeling. The only way to explain it is the need to fight, or I was about to die. Now, I always carry a gun on me, my Beretta 92S. It really never leaves my side. I sat up and looked around my tent. It was small enough that there wasn't much space. Here's the creepy part. I remember my father used to tell me to listen to the woods, the animals and night crawlers. They will go silent if something's wrong. You won't hear a single thing. And that's it. I heard nothing. The first time in my life I felt fear. I have had my fair share of demonic hauntings, and this doesn't even come close. I peered out of the tent. We had set the tent up on a good elevation facing an open field, about 100 yards or so away. Mind you, it was full moon and bright as heck. Something was standing there. I can only begin to describe this thing as a mammal, half a lizard thing. The best way I can describe is that it looked like half of the body of a horse. It had a lizard-like face, what I can only describe as spikes coming from the back, and one hell of a set of teeth. At first, I seriously thought someone was in a costume messing with us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting from this thing, an unearthly one. I did notice it was looking at something. I couldn't make out what kind of animal it was, but it was probably the size of a raccoon. It looked like it was trying to sneak by, but the animal just randomly fell on its side and just let this thing take it. I was absolutely terrified. I knew if this thing headed our way, no 9mm is going to do anything to it. I could even hear it breathing all the way from my tent. What only sounds like something breathing through pudding. I crawled to my friend's tent keeping a low profile. In a small relief, I noticed my friend Craig was also awake. He was looking at the same thing I was. We waited as the thing just stood there looking around. Then, it started to make its way through the tree lines. We could hear it smashing through the trees, and then silence. Craig and I just laid there for what felt like hours until the sun came up. Still, absolutely terrified. Justin woke up. Of course, he heard nothing and not believing a single word of what we said. We packed up that day, and I have never been back to those woods. I seriously was always afraid to tell this story. I'll probably be sent for a psych evaluation, and I don't care, because I am not making this crap up. In the fall of 2016, a friend and I decided to go hiking late in the afternoon in a densely wooded wilderness area in the mountains, not far from Fayetteville, Arkansas. My friend Rick was close to 60 at the time and recovering from a triple bypass he had undergone around 16 months earlier. We had been hiking these trails for about a year following his operation to strengthen his cardiovascular health. That day, a weekday, I hiked with a bottle of water, my wallet, and my keys, but nothing else. Nothing to protect myself. The trail we picked is a popular weekend hiking spot that we had taken dozens of times before. We were both comfortable with the hike and had never had a problem on that path, or any other for that matter. While Rick is older, and at the time a little more feeble after his health problems, I was in my mid-40s, well over 6 feet tall, and in pretty good shape. So, I wasn't really very worried about our safety. The trail we were on is on a state park adjacent to federal park land. It's an outdoors enthusiast's dream. Most of our trek that day was completely uneventful. We just enjoyed the autumn leaves and chatted casually as the sun dropped lower in the evening sky. We had seen nobody else that day, which was probably to be expected given that we chose to hike late on a weekday. We'd completed about 4 miles of the 6-mile loop up to that point, and it was as uneventful as any other. On our way back to the car, and about 2 miles from park area, we spotted someone. Through an opening in the trees, I saw a young woman, probably a college student. She was on the trail ahead of us, and moving in our direction. At first glance, I paid her very little attention, as the distance between us disappeared. That changed. I did not know her, so I could not have mistaken, but there was something about her posture and expression that just seemed off. As she got closer, it struck me that she had some semi-panicked look on her face and was moving quite quickly. But she was in athletic gear, so maybe she was just doing some cardio or something. She occasionally turned her head and stared over her shoulder. I followed her eyes and eventually noted that another woman about 50 yards behind her was walking up the path through the trees. The second woman was not wearing hiking gear. In fact, her clothing struck me as totally inappropriate. It was a warm afternoon, and we were all well inside a wooded state park area for miles away from any homes. But she was wearing semi-formal, office casual attire and a light jacket. I thought the clothes must have been secondhand because they were tattered and ill-fitting, and they definitely didn't look washed. She was a fit, athletic-looking woman who couldn't have been more than 25 or 30 years of age. It was too bizarre. The clothes were wrong for the trail, and they were wrong for the age. Everything about her was off. Her shoes struck me as being even more peculiar. When she got closer, I noticed she was wearing a scuffed, leather flats, casual shoes with no ankle support. I found it completely odd, because you just don't see people on this trail just as she was, and you never see them wearing shoes like that. My hiking partner, Rick, hadn't appeared to notice anything odd, as he was completely involved in the conversation and just kept talking. The second woman briefly glanced up, and we made eye contact as she neared us. The alarm bells were going off in my head. There was something in her eyes that made me feel uncomfortable. I don't know what she was thinking, if I'm being honest, but I swear she had contempt in her face. Part of me wondered whether I'd be offending her by staring, so I diverted my eyes and kept walking. I tried to tell myself that maybe she was homeless. Maybe she was wearing the only thing she had, and I was just being rude. But the warning bells were still going off in my head. I'm not a paranoid person, so having my sixth sense going off like that was very unsettling. I have a fantastic peripheral vision, so I turned my face toward Rick and acted like I was listening to him, but I was watching the creepy woman at the corner of my eye. The moment we passed, she spun her head around to study us, and she slowed her pace. My internal alarms grew louder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come to a stop and drop her face toward at the ground, her body half turned on the trail. It was very odd behavior. Rick and I kept walking around 50 yards further. We made it around a bend in the path, and I looked back at the woman before the trees obscured her view. She was still standing there. Her face was down, but she was staring a hole through us out of the corner of her eyes. That was the first time I realized that I couldn't see her hands. One was inside her jacket pocket, and the other was hidden from my view on the other side of her body. It creeped the hell out of me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. For half a mile, I didn't see her again, and had begun to wonder whether the first woman, the co-ed, had felt danger as well. Clearly she had, I thought, and that's why she was practically running through the woods at dusk. It also struck me that the woman was stopping and studying Rick and me, like she was deciding on whom to follow. We weren't moving as fast, we were walking as quickly as Rick could manage, and he was clearly more feeble than a co-ed. But those thoughts and my senses and I felt very uneasy, so I periodically checked behind us. At certain points through the woods, I could see more than 100 yards, and nothing. I began to worry about the co-ed. My hair stood up for a second time as I felt the strongest sensation of being watched. Again, thinking I was paranoid and half mocking myself for being afraid of the creepy woman, I turned my head around to assure myself she was not back there. I was wrong. She was there, following with her head down and moving briskly about 100 yards behind us, but with her hands hidden. I turned my head back to the trail in front of us and kept walking, still trying to convince myself that there was nothing out of the ordinary happening, that I was just being rude because she was dressed like a homeless woman. About 200 yards further along the path, I turned my head back to Rick, and my heart raced a bit. She had closed half the distance. Each time we walk around a bend in the woods obscured her location, she would emerge closer and closer to us. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, but nevertheless, I tried to get Rick to pick up the pace. By this time, he was clearly aware that we were being followed, and he was pretty uncomfortable as well. Though, to his credit, he did keep walking. With half a mile to go before we reached the parking area, I turned my head once again, and she was just 10 feet behind us. I hadn't seen or heard her get that close, and it freaked me out. I literally jumped. One of her hands was in her pockets, and the other was behind her back. I got the distinct feeling she had a weapon of some kind, and that she had no fear of despite the fact that I was considerably taller, albeit several years older. There was no mistaking her demeanor. She meant to do us harm, or at the very least she intended to intimidate us. I weaved my car keys between my knuckles. I handed my water bottle to Rick, and made an obvious fist with my left hand. With a half mile left in our hike, I thought to myself, if this is nothing, she'll pass us and move on, as clearly she's moving a lot faster than we are. I was accustomed to people overtaking us. But she didn't pass, and never acted like she knew we were there, which was the creepiest part. I kept my head turned her, as I walked and tried to get her to make eye contact, but she didn't look me in the eyes at first. She kept acting like neither Rick nor I were on the path a few feet ahead of her, and she'd followed so closely behind. I was completely unnerved, and that made me angry. I wanted her to see how pissed I was and to convey with a look that messing with me was a mistake. When she finally did make eye contact with me, I glared and clenched my fist. There was an instant where I couldn't read her expression. She was simply blank, but as she studied my face, she appeared simultaneously agitated and a little less confident. I was conveying, one thing on my face, back the fuck off. And at this point, I didn't give a damn if it appeared rude. She apparently thought better of whatever she was doing, and slowed her pace so that the distance between us grew to about 20 feet. But she was tense, and kept whatever she had in her hand hidden behind her. I never saw her hands. I knew she had a weapon though, and I believed she meant to do us harm. But I also know she recognized that I was ready to fight. I was mentally prepared to charge at her if I saw a gun or a knife, as I knew Rick could not run her. I thought to myself, I just have to surprise her. I also realized that I needed to have her in front of us. A few hundred feet further, about a quarter mile away from where our car was parked, she still was stalking us, and I had enough. I was in equal measures afraid and furious. I told Rick, that we were going to stop and let her pass, loud enough for her to hear us. Just as I was getting ready to stop on the trail and make her walk in front of us, she veered into a small clearing, plowing through waist-high brush, crossed a ditch and scurried through a tree line to a road that ran through the woods in between the main road and the parking area. I kept my eyes on her the entire time. She had a car. It was parked alongside the little service road, partially hidden by shrubs, not in the parking lot. The last time we made eye contact just before she climbed in her car, it was clear from the expression on her face that she was very angry. I glared at her, expressing my own anger, and kept walking. When her car started and she drove away, Rick got quiet before asking me, "What in the hell was she doing? Did she have a gun?" I told him I didn't know. I never saw a weapon. We walked back to our car without saying another word. Once the engine was on and the doors were shut, we chatted a bit more and decided to call the authorities and report the incident, and to make sure to have them check the poor co-ed who had passed first. To this day, I have no idea what the creepy woman was planning to do. I don't know if she wanted to rob us, harm us, scare us, I have no idea. I'm just thankful she decided better of it. I have hiked that trail more than 50 times since then, but I've never seen her again. I live in northern New South Wales, Australia, in an area where the bush is quite dense. Now, I've always been into the paranormal and have experienced a few situations that just cannot be explained. The one I'm about to tell is the most freakiest one so far. So, here's a backstory that links into the story I'm about to tell. So, I live with my parents and my two brothers. About a year back, we were staying with some friends in a tiny desert town with a population of 200. I know, it is very tiny. We heard about an older man who lived in one of the houses and was murdered about 4 years back. The locals suspected the murderer to be a dodgy, dirty homeless man who was lingering around the children and just being completely and utterly creepy, so they kicked him out of the town. This man had a tattoo on his forehead saying, "Mom." Now, fast forward to when we were camping in the bush. We went for a drive on a day that I was going to have a shower in a place where you paid about $2 for a shower if you were camping close by. Anyway, we parked and noticed a man with a small puppy trying to hitchhike. Me being a nice person, decided to ask him where he was going and let him know my father could probably drive him. Now, when I sit in my back passenger seat, it sometimes looks like I'm the one driving. So, I'm assuming he thought I was alone, as he seemed perfectly fine at first, but then hesitant when he noticed our Rottweiler and the rest of my family. They gave him a lift while I had my shower. I don't know why, but I got a bad feeling. They took a little bit longer than usual. They came back in shock. It was the same fucking man, with the tattoo on his head from that small town. We coincidentally bumped into this possible killer, who was last seen in a complete different state 4 years ago. He was wearing a hat when I spoke to him, so I didn't see the tattoo. My parents told me how crazy bad the vibes were, and how quiet everyone was. They even stopped and dropped him off at a public spot, so they did not feel that safe at all with him. Now, we are driving back to the camp and we're cracking jokes about how we would be waiting back at the camp for us with coffee. My family was terrible with a sense of humor. We got to the camp at light at night and it was dark. We had 2 big tents and we slept in a big kitchen tent. I was somehow still in a bit shaken sense, but I somehow decided to grab a knife and put it next to my bed, just in case. I was cleaning off my knife when I heard something walking behind the tent. I called out to my little brother, and he replied that he was in the campfire with everyone else, including the dog. I suddenly became very frightened, and without even thinking, looked next to me inside the food tent. And the only way I can describe it was that I seen this old, dirty man crouching down in the dark, breathing heavily and looking me dead in the eyes. I froze for a second and screamed like I have never before, and I began running to everyone else. I was getting ready to call the police, but once my dad walked in with a huge stick, it was like he just vanished. It was just like it didn't make sense. There was so much food in that tent that no one could have really been in it without crushing everything. Plus, nothing was even moved when we looked inside. When things settled down and we couldn't find anything around, we eventually all tried going to sleep. After about 10 minutes of trying to sleep, and still horrified from whatever the fuck I had just seen, I started hearing footsteps around the tent. It went on for about 5 minutes. I listened very carefully. This thing had 2 feet, and it sounded heavy and big. To try and possibly scare it off, I told my brother, very loudly, to grab the knife and see what's outside. Everyone else admitted to hearing it also. My dog started barking and followed my brother outside. She then chased whatever it was into the forest. My brother couldn't see it, but he said it was running our dog, and it sounded as if it were dragging something heavy. After about 15 minutes, we tried going back to sleep. Just before I managed to get some sleep, a voice from outside very faintly said my dog's name. My dog didn't make a sound for the rest of the night. Now, I don't know if this had absolutely anything to do with that day, but I fell asleep that night in my face towards the tarp wall. I had the craziest vivid nightmare. I'll try to explain the nightmare as I can. It was like I was face to face with an autopsy of a young blonde American girl. She was speaking into my ear, going into details about how she was murdered, how her body was found, and how good her life was beforehand. I tried looking away from the body, but everywhere I turned my head, I was just looking at a different part of the body while she still spoke. This dream went on until she said a name of a man, and then I woke up. I don't remember the name, and it was not familiar to me. Anyway, that was probably the scariest, strangest night I've ever experienced, and I no longer enjoy camping. I hope you enjoyed my story as much as I enjoyed listening to everyone else's experiences. This story happened to me when I was hiking in the woods. It was about 3 a.m., so there was no light yet. There is rarely people up there, and there are no trails. It's mostly trees and hills and wild cows. I was walking down a hill and I thought, why not do some exploring? So I decided to go down a few more hills until I was on flat ground. I looked around and saw what looked like a trailer. I decided to go into it. I had my gun in my hand, just in case some crazy bear or something tried to kill me. Anyway, when I was inside the trailer, I nearly threw up. It smelled like sulfur, but extremely bad. I walked further into it and saw a bed, a bag, and some books on black magic. Then I left because I couldn't stand that smell anymore. I left the trailer and continued walking. I came across a house. Well, maybe a bit bigger. I was like, why not go in there? And so I went in. I saw the same books and I was kind of creeped out. Then I went upstairs and saw that there was some stuff on the second floor. I heard something move. I got a terrible feeling of bad energy. Then I decided to yell for whatever reason at whoever was up there. I said, I know you're up there, motherfucker. Say something. But there was complete silence. I shot my gun through the roof and, this time, heard a scuffle. The sun had started rising now, so I decided it was best to leave. Before I left, I saw something written on the stair. It said, House of Spirits. I booked it out of there, and I felt the same feeling of being watched and scared. I turned around and there was a man on the roof. He was staring at me. He had a long beard and long hair. He was smiling at me, and I felt so disturbed. I shot at the man and yelled at him, but he kept smiling. I ran back to keep an eye on him, and I booked it into the truck. I always see that man around town, but I guess he doesn't recognize me. A few years have passed and my father's friends know him. He is always at the library. He gives everyone bad vibes and stuff, but I'm lucky to be alive. He was a devil worshipper and could have killed me, and no one would have known where to find our car. Anyway, I won't be going near their house again. This happened about 2 to 3 years ago. I live in northwestern Montana, and it was my senior year summer. And I was going through some personal stuff that year, and I thought the best way to escape from that was to get off the grid and go camping in the forest. My plan was to go on a hiking trail that not a lot of people hike on and get to this small campsite. I packed my gear that everyone brings on hiking trips: food, water, tents, bear spray, etc. When I left, it was after work and it took a couple hours to reach the beginning of the trail. The hike was 10 miles into the forest, which had winding paths, rocky areas, and thick and overgrown brush that at times was hard to see the trail because of how overgrown the trail has been with the lack of people taking it. The trail just led you deeper into the mountains. The hike was pretty uneventful until I reached the campground. When you come out of the trail into the campground, the first thing you see is a small open area about 30 to 50 feet, just enough to hold a couple tents. And when you look in front, you can see a small lake with trees packed together tight, and it's hard to see through right above the Rocky Mountains, sticking up high in position to where the sun goes over. The surrounding area is covered in pine trees, making it hard to see more than 20 feet in front of you. When I reached the campground, I set up my tent right away because the sun was going down fast in the mountains. When I reached the campground, I set up my tent right away because the sun was going down fast, and with the mountains there, it grew dark quick, and since I have had nothing to eat, I got a fire going and put some food on. And here's where it starts to begin. Nightfall came. The night was calm, and just a small breeze was coming to make the trees just move enough to where it starts to make karaoke noises. The night was pretty chilly, and I made a pretty good fire. About an hour into the night, I got this foul smell that just seemed to linger around. It must have been coming from the wind, that is what I thought anyway. But the smell was strong and felt like it was right next to me. I threw another log on the fire, and then I hear the scream of what sounded like a woman next to me coming from the direction where the wind was coming from. At least, I think. It freaked the hell out of me, because I thought I was the only person up here. I didn't see any other tents, and there's no place to set up tents other than the spot I'm in, and the scream didn't come from the trail I came from. The visibility that night came from the campfire and the moon reflecting off the lake, so I couldn't see far. But I reached into my backpack and pulled out a flashlight and just slowly started scanning the area for a woman. I yelled back, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" And the woman yelled back, "Help me." So I said, "Where are you? Are you hurt?" Trying to find the source of the sound. There was a small pause, and then she yelled back, "Come here." But there was something off about the voice. I just kept thinking to myself, that woman didn't sound like she was hurting or anything was really attacking her. So that raised a red flag in my mind, and everything I said seemed like it didn't matter to the woman. She was just trying to lure me out of the campsite with some 2 words, "Help me." Right after that, I reached into my backpack and pulled out my handgun and kept scanning the forest. After a bit, I could hear far in the distance elk making noises, and right after the elk finished, I hear the loudest high-pitched screech that I've ever heard in my life, in the same direction the girl was yelling at me from. And after the screech, I hear movement in the direction of the elk, with the bushes moving violently until the bushes became unmoving, and the campground came to a standstill again. After the thing ran away, the foul smell went with it. And though the rest of the night was calm, except for the same screeching in the distance, which sounded like it was miles away, just echoing through the mountains, I have never been more scared in my life. So I waited until dawn, packed up my things, and headed home. I haven't told anyone my story, but if you have any idea what this could be, please let me know.